Following part 1 of the story, it had been only 48 hours since my life changed forever, but already the quiet waitress I'd once been felt like a distant memory, a ghost of a woman who'd existed in the shadows of Le Jardin restaurant. That woman had served wine and cleared plates, invisible to the wealthy patrons who filled the elegant dining room night after night. She'd perfected the art of being overlooked, of moving through her world without making waves or drawing attention. But that woman had also possessed something that would shatter her careful invisibility. The gift of her grandmother's language, Korean words learned at the knee of a war bride who'd taught her that understanding someone's native tongue was the first step to understanding their heart. When I'd overheard 3 businessmen mocking a Korean man at table 7, assuming he couldn't understand their cruel English, I'd made a choice that changed everything. I'd approached Jinwoo Park and warned him in his own language about their plans to cheat him in business dealings. The surprise in his dark eyes when I'd spoken Korean, the grateful wonder that had transformed his carefully controlled features, had been the beginning of something neither of us could have anticipated. What followed had been a whirlwind of revelation and danger. Jinwoo wasn't the helpless victim I'd imagined. He understood English perfectly, had been strategically allowing others to underestimate him while he gathered intelligence about his enemies. He was also far more than a simple businessman. The Park family shipping empire had connections that ran deep into organized crime. Resources built over 3 generations of men who'd learned to protect what mattered most to them through whatever means necessary. Our first dinner together had been a revelation of souls recognizing each other across impossible circumstances. Over authentic Korean food, we'd shared our histories. My grandmother's journey from Seoul to France, my own wandering across Europe in search of something I couldn't name. Jinwoo had told me about his family's complicated legacy, about his attempt to build something cleaner in America, about the enemies who'd followed him from Seoul, and the local criminals who wanted to force him into submission. That night, when he'd made love to me with such tender reverence, I'd felt pieces of myself I'd thought were broken, finally clicking into place. But morning had brought crisis. Jinwoo's business enemies had escalated their threats, specifically targeting me as leverage against him. I'd been forced to flee my apartment, guided by David Kim to a safe house, run by Jinwoo's Aunt Helen. It was Helen who'd explained the full scope of what I'd walked into, who'd made it clear that my quiet, invisible life was over forever. But instead of running back to safety, I'd made the choice that defined everything that came after. I'd chosen to stand with Jinwoo, to become his partner in the dangerous world he inhabited, rather than the weakness his enemies assumed I represented. Now, as Helen Park stood before my open suitcase, with the expression of a general surveying inadequate troops, her perfectly manicured fingers picking through my modest wardrobe with barely concealed dismay, I understood that the transformation I'd begun was about to accelerate far beyond anything I'd imagined. "This won't do at all," she murmured, holding up my favorite black dress, the same one I'd worn to dinner with Jinwoo just 2 nights ago, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since then. "If you're going to stand beside my nephew in his world, you need to look like you belong there." I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, watching her systematic dismantling of my carefully curated invisibility. Each piece of clothing she rejected felt like another layer of my old self being stripped away, and the woman staring back at me from the mirror across the room was already becoming a stranger. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "What exactly are we preparing for?" Helen's dark eyes, so like Jinwoo's, met mine in the reflection. "War, darling. The civilized kind, fought with designer gowns and diamond earrings instead of guns and knives. Though, make no mistake, it's every bit as deadly." Jinwoo appeared in the doorway as if summoned by our conversation, his presence immediately filling the room with that controlled energy I'd come to associate with him. He'd changed from his rumpled suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the lean strength of his frame. But there was something different about him now. Something harder, more dangerous than the man who'd made love to me with such tender reverence just hours ago. "The Castellanos want to meet," he said without preamble, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Tonight, neutral ground." Helen straightened, and I caught a flash of something predatory in her smile. How civilized of them. and unexpected. "Who are the Castellanos?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Jin-woo moved into the room, his gaze never leaving my face. "The people who've been making my life difficult. The ones who threatened you. They want to negotiate?" Hope flickered in my chest, fragile and desperate. "They want to size up their opposition," Helen corrected. "See what resources Jin-woo has at his disposal, what kind of backing he's managed to acquire since arriving in their territory." Jin-woo sat beside me on the bed, his hand finding mine with familiar warmth. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw a stranger looking back. Someone capable of violence. Someone who'd learned to navigate dangerous waters long before he'd ever touched my skin. "They'll expect me to bring you," he said quietly. "My weakness. The leverage they plan to use against me." The word, weakness, hit like a physical blow, and I jerked my hand away from his. "Is that what I am to you?" His expression softened immediately, the mask slipping to reveal the man who'd whispered promises in the dark. "No, you're my strength, but they don't understand the difference yet." "Then let's teach them," Helen said briskly, pulling an elegant black gown from the back of the closet, something that definitely hadn't come from my suitcase. The gown was a masterpiece of understated elegance, flowing silk that hugged my curves without being obvious about it, a neckline that suggested sophistication rather than seduction. When Helen fastened a strand of pearls around my neck, not my grandmother's simple studs, but something that belonged in a museum, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. "Better," Helen pronounced, circling me with the critical eye of a fashion editor, "but we need something with more authority." She disappeared into her own room, returning with a jewelry box that made my breath catch. The necklace she lifted from its velvet nest was a work of art. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in an intricate pattern that caught the light like captured stars. "Helen," Jin-woo said quietly, recognizing the piece. "That's Mother's," which makes it perfect. She fastened the necklace with reverent care, her fingers gentle at my nape. "Your mother understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon a woman can carry is the certainty that she belongs in any room she enters." The weight of the necklace was substantial, but it was the symbolism that made my knees weak. This was a family heirloom, something precious and irreplaceable, and Helen was placing it around the neck of a woman she'd known for less than 12 hours. "I can't," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the diamonds. "What if something happens? What if I lose it, or break it, or—" "Then we'll deal with it," Jin-woo said firmly, standing behind me so our eyes met in the mirror. "But you won't lose it, Claire. You're stronger than you know." Helen stepped back to admire her work, and even I had to admit the transformation was stunning. The woman in the mirror looked like she could walk into any boardroom, any social event, any dangerous meeting, and command respect through sheer presence alone. "Much better," Helen pronounced. "Now let's discuss strategy." The next hour was a crash course in a world I'd never imagined existed. Helen explained the intricate social hierarchies of organized crime, the unspoken rules that governed everything from seating arrangements to gift-giving. Jin-woo outlined the key players we'd be meeting, their relationships, their weaknesses, their motivations. "Antonio Castellano is old school," Jin-woo said, showing me photographs on his phone. "He believes women should be seen and not heard, that business is for men only. His son Marcus is more progressive, but he defers to his father in public." "And their wives?" "Sofia Castellano runs her husband's social calendar and half his legitimate businesses, though she'd never admit it in mixed company. Marcus's wife died 3 years ago, cancer. He hasn't remarried, focuses everything on his daughter instead." I studied the faces in the photographs, trying to memorize details that might be important later. These people looked so normal, so civilized. It was hard to reconcile their pleasant smiles with the threats and intimidation tactics Jin-woo had described. "What exactly do they want from you?" Jin-woo's jaw tightened. "Control. My shipping routes give access to markets they've been trying to penetrate for years. They want me as a junior partner, which means I do the work while they take the profits and make the decisions. And if you refuse, they make it impossible for me to operate in this city. Shipments disappear, Permits get denied. Employees receive visits from people who suggest they might be happier working elsewhere. Helen poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle she'd opened earlier, her movements deliberate and controlled. What they don't realize is that Jin Woo isn't some naive foreign businessman they can intimidate. The Park family has been handling territorial disputes for 3 generations. Meaning, Jin Woo and Helen exchanged a look that spoke of shared history, family secrets, old wounds, and older loyalties. Meaning, Jin Woo said finally, that my grandfather didn't build our shipping empire by being polite to people who threatened his family. The implication hung in the air between us, heavy with promise and menace. I thought about my quiet life as a waitress, my carefully maintained invisibility, my complete ignorance of the violent undercurrents that apparently flowed beneath the surface of civilized society. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Jin Woo took my hands, his thumbs tracing circles on my palms. You don't have to do anything except be yourself. Be the woman who stood up for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Be the woman who chose courage over safety. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make things worse for you? Impossible. His smile was gentle, so different from the predatory expression he'd worn earlier. You've already made everything better just by being here. Helen cleared her throat diplomatically. As touching as this is, we need to leave in 30 minutes. Claire, do you have any questions about tonight's performance? Performance. The word crystallized something that had been bothering me since this conversation began. That's what this is, isn't it? We're all playing roles. Life is performance, darling, Helen said with a knowing smile. The only difference is the stakes. Tonight, if we perform well, everyone goes home safe. If we don't... She didn't need to finish the sentence. The alternative hung in the air like a sword. The restaurant Jin Woo chose for the meeting was the kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't take reservations from the general public, and probably had more security cameras than a government building. We were escorted to a private dining room by a maitre d' who treated Jin Woo with the kind of deference usually reserved for heads of state. The Castellanos were already seated when we arrived. Antonio at the head of the table, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His wife Sophia sat to his right, elegant in navy silk and diamonds that made my borrowed necklace look modest by comparison. Marcus, their son, occupied the chair to Antonio's left, younger than his father, but with the same calculating gaze. Mr. Park. Antonio rose as we entered, extending his hand with old-world courtesy. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Jin Woo shook his hand with perfect composure. Mr. Castellano, allow me to introduce Claire Bennett. The moment Antonio's eyes fell on me, I felt the weight of his assessment. He was cataloging everything. My dress, my jewelry, my posture, the way Jin Woo's hand rested protectively on my lower back, deciding whether I was worth his attention or simply another pretty decoration. Enchanting, he said, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that managed to be both courtly and slightly mocking. Jin Woo didn't mention he'd found such charming company. Claire is more than charming, Jin Woo replied smoothly. She's invaluable. Sophia Castellano's eyes sharpened with interest. Oh, in what capacity? This was it. The moment Helen had prepared me for. The test disguised as polite conversation. I felt Jin Woo's tension in the barely perceptible tightening of his fingers against my back. Felt the weight of expectations and the danger of saying the wrong thing. Instead of answering directly, I smiled and took my seat with practiced grace, allowing the diamonds at my throat to catch the candlelight. Jin Woo is too modest. I'm simply someone who believes in supporting the people I care about. It was a non-answer that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. And I saw approval flicker in Sophia's eyes. Antonio, however, wasn't satisfied. Support can take many forms, he said, settling back into his chair. Financial, social, political, intimate. The last word carried deliberate weight, a casual cruelty designed to make me uncomfortable, to establish his dominance in this conversation. But instead of shrinking away, I felt something steady and cold settle in my chest. Indeed, it can, I agreed pleasantly. I've found that the most valuable support often comes from understanding, truly understanding, the people and situations one encounters. Marcus Castellano leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued. Understanding how, exactly? Language, for instance. I met his gaze directly. People often assume that communication barriers are weaknesses, when in fact, they can be tremendous assets for those who know how to navigate them properly. Jinwoo's hand found mine under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of solidarity and warning. We were walking into dangerous territory now, touching on the very skills that had brought us together. You speak multiple languages? Sophia asked, her tone genuinely curious now. A few. My grandmother believed that understanding someone's native tongue was the first step to understanding their heart. I paused, letting the words settle. She also believed that people reveal their true intentions more freely when they think they're not being understood. The silence that followed was electric. Antonio's eyes had gone very still, and I realized he was reassessing everything about me, about what I might represent to Jinwoo's operations. Fascinating, he said finally. And what languages do you speak, Miss Bennett? French, obviously. German. Some Italian. I paused, then added with perfect casualness. Korean, of course. Spanish when necessary. The last word landed like a stone in still water. I didn't need to understand the rapid glance that passed between Antonio and his son to know that Spanish was significant to their operations, that my casual mention of it had shifted the entire dynamic of this conversation. Korean, Marcus repeated slowly. That's unusual for a young European woman. My grandmother spent several years in Seoul, I explained, maintaining my pleasant tone while my heart hammered against my ribs. She always said that every language you learn is another way of seeing the world. Jinwoo squeezed my hand gently, a silent message of pride and caution in equal measure. We were playing a dangerous game, revealing just enough of my capabilities to establish my value without making me seem like a direct threat. How remarkably convenient, Antonio said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp as razors. For Jinwoo, I mean, having someone who can navigate cultural complexities. Convenience had nothing to do with it, Jinwoo replied, his voice carrying an edge of warning. What Claire and I have goes far deeper than business advantages. Of course, Sophia interjected smoothly, clearly recognizing the rising tension. Love is rarely convenient, is it? But it can be incredibly motivating. The way she said the last word made it clear she understood exactly what kind of motivation she was discussing. Love as leverage, as weakness, as the thing that could bring a careful man to his knees. Indeed, I said quietly, meeting her gaze directly. It can inspire people to protect what matters most to them, at any cost. Another charged silence. I just made it clear that I wasn't simply Jinwoo's weakness. I was someone who would fight for him. Someone willing to embrace whatever methods might be necessary to keep him safe. Antonio leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, he said finally, this evening has proven far more educational than I expected. The waiter appeared as if summoned, presenting menus and wine lists that I barely saw through my adrenaline-hazed vision. We'd survived the first phase of whatever test this evening represented, but I could feel the careful balance we'd established shifting as the conversation moved into deeper waters. Tell me, Jinwoo, Antonio said once our orders had been placed, how are you finding our city's business climate? Welcoming, I hope? Challenging, Jinwoo replied diplomatically. But I've always appreciated challenges. They tend to bring out the best in people. Or the worst, Marcus added with what might have been humor. True, but I've found that understanding the difference between the two is usually a matter of perspective. Antonio's smile sharpened. Perspective is indeed everything. For instance, some might view your rapid expansion into our established markets as aggressive, while others might simply see ambition. Here it was, the real reason for tonight's meeting, not social courtesy or genuine interest in negotiation, but a civilized declaration of war, wrapped in elegant phrasing and expensive wine. Ambition implies taking something that belongs to someone else, Jinwoo replied calmly. I prefer to think of it as recognizing untapped potential. Untapped? Antonio's eyebrows rose. My dear boy, the markets you've entered have been carefully cultivated for years. Relationships have been built. Understandings have been reached. Your arrival has disrupted certain delicate balances. I felt Jinwoo's tension ratchet higher, saw the careful mask he wore beginning to show cracks. This was the moment Helen had warned us about, when politeness gave way to threats, when the civilized veneer dropped to reveal the predators beneath. Perhaps, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the thickening atmosphere. The question isn't whether those balances needed disrupting. Every eye at the table turned to me. I'd violated the unspoken rule that women at these meetings were decorative rather than participatory, but something in Sophia's expression suggested she was more intrigued than offended by my breach of protocol. Meaning? Antonio's tone was dangerous now, all pretense of courtesy abandoned, meaning that healthy competition usually benefits everyone involved. Markets expand, services improve, customers have more choices. I met his stare without flinching, drawing strength from the weight of Jinwoo's mother's necklace around my throat. Unless, of course, certain parties prefer artificial scarcity to genuine excellence. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I'd essentially accused Antonio of maintaining his market position through intimidation rather than superior service. And everyone at the table knew it. Marcus laughed suddenly, the sound genuine and surprised. She has a point, Papa. When was the last time we worried about actually improving our operations instead of just protecting our territory? Antonio's glare could have melted steel, but Sophia leaned forward with obvious interest. Miss Bennett, you seem to have given this considerable thought. Do you have experience in international commerce? I have experience in watching people, I replied carefully, and in recognizing when fear is being used as a business strategy. The silence that followed was deafening. I'd crossed a line from which there was no retreat, had called out the intimidation tactics that formed the foundation of the Castellanos, power. But instead of fear, I felt a strange kind of peace. This was who I was choosing to become, someone who stood up to bullies regardless of how much power they wielded. Jinwoo's hand found mine again, his fingers strong and warm and reassuring. Whatever consequences my words might bring, I wouldn't face them alone. You're quite remarkable, Miss Bennett, Antonio said finally, his tone unreadable. Jinwoo, you've chosen your companion well. I didn't choose her for business advantages, Jinwoo replied, his voice steady but edged with steel. But I won't apologize for the fact that she sees clearly. It's one of the things I love most about her. Love. He'd said it openly, in front of these dangerous strangers, claiming me as completely as any formal declaration could have. My chest tightened with emotion so intense it was almost painful. Love, Antonio mused, as if the word were foreign to him. How refreshing. It's been some time since I've encountered genuine emotion in business discussions. This isn't a business discussion, Jinwoo said quietly. This is a conversation between potential neighbors about how to coexist peacefully. The business aspects are secondary, are they? Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Because from where I sit, it looks like you're building something that could be very threatening to established interests. Or very beneficial to them, depending on how those interests choose to respond. The food arrived then, providing a temporary reprieve from the escalating tension. As plates were arranged and wine was poured, I caught Sophia Castellano studying me with the intensity of a chess master, evaluating an opponent's strategy. Miss Bennett, she said finally, her voice pitched for private conversation while the men discussed shipping routes and port access. May I ask what you did before this? The question was loaded with implication. Before Jinwoo, before this world of dangerous business and family loyalties and conversations that carried the weight of life and death. I was a waitress, I said simply. In London, then here. I served people, tried to anticipate what they needed, learned to read situations quickly. And now? I glanced at Jinwoo. saw him deep in conversation with Antonio about regulatory frameworks and customs procedures, his entire being focused on the deadly chess match they were playing with words and implications. Now I'm learning that some situations require more than just reading, I said quietly. Sometimes they require action. Sophia's smile was knowing, almost maternal. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer it as one. Yes. And you understand what that means? The world you're entering? I thought about my quiet apartment, my careful routines, my years of choosing safety over risk at every turn. Then I thought about the way Jin-woo had looked at me when I'd stood up to those men at the restaurant. The reverence in his touch, the promises we'd whispered in the dark. I'm beginning to, I said, and I'm not afraid of it. You should be, she said gently. But I can see why he chose you. There's steel under that elegant surface. Before I could respond, Antonio's voice cut through our quiet conversation. Miss Bennett, my wife tells me you have an interesting perspective on risk assessment. I felt the weight of attention shift back to me, felt Jin-woo's alertness spike as he realized I'd been having a separate conversation with Sophia. The evening was entering its final phase, and whatever decisions were made in the next few minutes would determine whether we left this restaurant as allies, enemies, or something more ambiguous and dangerous. I think risk is often a matter of perspective, I said carefully. What seems dangerous to one person might seem like opportunity to another. And what do you see when you look at the current situation between your Jin-woo and my family's interests? The possessive way he said, your Jin-woo, wasn't lost on anyone at the table. He was acknowledging the bond between us while simultaneously using it as a weapon, making it clear that any threat to Jin-woo would necessarily involve me as well. I see two groups of people who want the same thing, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Success, security, the ability to protect the people they care about. The question is whether you'll achieve those goals by working together or by trying to destroy each other. And if cooperation isn't possible? The question hung in the air like a blade. This was it. The moment of truth, when polite conversation gave way to ultimatums and everyone showed their true cards. I looked at Jin-woo, saw him watching me with an intensity that took my breath away. He'd brought me here as his partner, trusted me to hold my own in this conversation that could determine our future. The least I could do was be worthy of that trust. Then, I suppose, I said quietly, meeting Antonio's gaze without flinching, we'll all find out just how far people are willing to go to protect what they love. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with unspoken threats and promises, and the weight of choices that couldn't be taken back. Then Antonio Castellano threw back his head and laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and completely unexpected. Outstanding, he said, raising his wineglass in what might have been a toast or a salute. Jin-woo, you magnificent bastard, you've found yourself a queen. The tension in the room shifted, but didn't disappear entirely. Like a storm passing overhead without breaking. Whatever test this evening had represented, we'd apparently passed it. For now. But as we finished our dinner and made our polite farewells, as Jin-woo helped me into my coat and we walked out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. And somewhere in the shadows of this dangerous new world I'd chosen to enter, bigger challenges were waiting for us both. The attack came 3 blocks from the restaurant. One moment we were walking toward Jin-woo's car, my hand tucked into the crook of his arm, the weight of his mother's necklace, a comforting presence against my throat. The next, Jin-woo was shoving me behind the bulk of a parked SUV as the sharp crack of gunfire split the night air. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos erupting around us. But I could see the tension in every line of his body, the way his hand moved instinctively towards something concealed beneath his jacket. More shots rang out, shattering the windshield of the car beside us. I pressed myself against the cold metal, my heart hammering so hard I was sure it would give away our position. This wasn't the civilized warfare of dinner conversations and veiled threats. This was raw, immediate, lethal. Jinwoo, I whispered, reaching for him instinctively. He caught my hand, his fingers strong and reassuring despite the violence surrounding us. I know, it's going to be okay. But nothing about this felt okay. Through the gap beneath the SUV, I could see feet moving, searching, hunting. Our attackers were methodical, professional, working to cut off our escape routes with military precision. Jinwoo's phone buzzed once. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened further. They took David. David Kim, the gentleman who'd driven me to safety just that morning. The thought of him in danger because of my connection to Jinwoo sent rage flooding through my system, burning away the paralysis of fear. The Castellanos? I breathed. No. Jinwoo's voice was grim. This is someone else entirely. Someone who's been waiting for me to expose my weakness. My weakness. The words from our dinner conversation echoed in my mind, taking on new and terrible meaning. By bringing me into his world, by claiming me so publicly, Jinwoo had painted a target on both our backs. A voice called out in what sounded like Korean, harsh and demanding. Jinwoo went very still beside me, his entire body coiling with tension. What did they say? I whispered. His jaw tightened. They want me to come out. Alone. They promise not to hurt you if I surrender myself. No. The word tore from my throat before I could stop it. Jinwoo? No. Claire. His eyes met mine, dark and determined, and already saying goodbye. This is my world, my responsibility. I won't let you pay for my choices, and I won't let you sacrifice yourself for mine. I gripped his hand tighter, drawing strength from the connection between us. We're in this together, remember? Whatever comes next, we face it as partners. Another voice joined the first, also speaking Korean. Jinwoo translated in a whisper that carried the weight of death sentences. They're from Seoul. My father's old enemies. They've been waiting 5 years for a chance to finish what they started. What they started? The war that sent me to America in the first place. His smile was bitter, full of old pain and older regrets. I thought I could leave it behind, build something clean. But the past has a way of catching up with you. The Korean voices were getting closer, their tone increasingly impatient. Soon they'd work up the courage to rush our position, and then all our whispered promises and desperate plans would mean nothing. There's something else, Jinwoo said quietly, his hand moving to the small of my back. They're not just here for revenge. They want my shipping routes, my contacts, everything I've built. If they eliminate me and take you as leverage against my family... He didn't need to finish. I understood the implications with crystalline clarity. I wasn't just collateral damage in this ancient war. I was a prize. A way to control Jinwoo's empire even after his death. Then we don't let them have either, I said firmly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Jinwoo stared at me, something like wonder flickering in his dark eyes. What are you thinking? Before I could answer, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Someone had called the police. Probably the restaurant, or a neighbor, or one of the many security cameras that dotted this upscale district. The Korean voices became urgent, clearly debating whether to complete their mission or retreat. In that moment of hesitation, I saw our chance. Can you get us to that building? I pointed across the street to a high-rise with an underground parking garage. Jinwoo followed my gaze, calculating distances and cover options with the eye of someone who'd learned urban warfare the hard way. Maybe. But Claire, if we run now, they'll just try again. And again. Until they succeed, or until we make it impossible for them to try. I met his eyes, letting him see the determination burning in mine. You said your family has been handling territorial disputes for 3 generations, so handle this one. Understanding dawned across his features, followed by something that looked like pride. You want me to fight back. I want you to win. I touched the diamonds at my throat, feeling the weight of his mother's legacy, the strength of women who'd loved dangerous men and found ways to keep them safe. Jinwoo pulled out his phone, typing rapidly with one hand while keeping the other on the gun I now realized he'd been carrying all evening. Helen, he said quietly into the phone when she answered. We need the Seoul protocols. All of them. Whatever that meant, Helen's response was immediate and efficient. I heard her giving rapid orders in Korean, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling crises. "David," Jinwoo asked. "Safe House 3, bruised, but breathing." Helen's voice was audible through the phone, crisp and controlled. "The team is mobilizing now. 20 minutes to full containment. We don't have 20 minutes." "Then make them count." The line went dead, and Jinwoo turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part predator, part protector, wholly dangerous. "What happens in 20 minutes?" I asked. "The Seoul protocols are what my grandfather used when diplomacy failed," Jinwoo said, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Complete territorial lockdown. Every resource, every contact, every favor owed to the Park family gets called in simultaneously." "And the men hunting us?" His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Find out that they're not the only ones who know how to wage war in foreign countries." A shout went up from our attackers. They'd spotted the approaching police cars and were making their decision. Jinwoo tensed, ready to move, but I caught his arm. "Wait," I whispered, an idea crystallizing in my mind. "You said they want to take me as leverage against your family." "Yes, but... So, let them try." Jinwoo's eyes went wide with horror. "Claire, absolutely not. I won't use you as bait. Then I'll die, knowing I fought for something worth having." Jinwoo kissed me then, hard and desperate and full of promises that went beyond words. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, both of us knowing this might be goodbye. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too. Now go save us both." The next few minutes passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated chaos. Jinwoo created a diversion, drawing our attackers' attention while I slipped out from behind the SUV and allowed myself to be captured with just enough resistance to make it believable. The men who took me were professionals, efficient and cold, speaking in rapid Korean as they bundled me into a waiting van. But they made the mistake of assuming I couldn't understand them, and their careless conversation gave me everything I needed to know about their operation. They were indeed from Seoul, sent by families who'd been warring with Jinwoo's grandfather for decades. They had a safe house across town, backup teams positioned at strategic points throughout the city, and orders to hold me, until Jinwoo capitulated completely. What they didn't have was any idea that their carefully planned operation was about to collide with resources they couldn't have imagined. The safe house they took me to was nondescript, functional, designed for temporary containment rather than long-term imprisonment. They secured me to a chair in what had once been a living room, posted guards, and settled in to wait for Jinwoo's surrender. I counted 7 men total, armed but relaxed, confident in their success. They spoke freely around me, discussing their plans, their timeline, their backup strategies. And with each careless word, I built a more complete picture of their operation, information that would be invaluable when Jinwoo's people arrived, because they would arrive. I had absolute faith in that. Jinwoo had spent 5 years building his empire, cultivating relationships, earning the kind of loyalty that transcended simple business arrangements. When the Seoul protocols activated, these men would discover they'd walked into a trap of their own making. The first sign that something was wrong came exactly 18 minutes after my capture. One of the guards answered his phone, spoke briefly, then hung up with a troubled expression. A rapid conversation in Korean followed, voices tense with growing concern. "What's happening?" the leader demanded. "Communications are down," the guard replied. "All our teams have gone dark." More phone calls, growing desperation, the slow realization that their carefully coordinated operation was falling apart around them. I kept my expression neutral, even as fierce satisfaction burned in my chest. "The girl," one of them said suddenly, looking at me with new suspicion. "She understands us." The leader's eyes sharpened, focusing on me with deadly intensity. "Is that true?" I could have lied, could have maintained my facade of helplessness. Instead, I met his gaze directly and answered in perfect Korean. "Yes, and you're all about to discover why that was a mistake." The effect was immediate and electric. Weapons were drawn, voices raised, the careful control of their operation dissolving into barely managed panic. They'd assumed they were dealing with an ignorant civilian, a simple weakness to exploit. Instead, they'd captured someone who'd been gathering intelligence from the moment they'd taken her. "What else do you know?" the leader snarled, pressing the barrel of his gun against my temple. I smiled, thinking of Jinwoo, of Helen, of the vast network of loyalty and resources now mobilizing to tear these men apart. "I know that you have approximately 2 minutes before this building is surrounded. I know that your escape routes have been compromised. And I know that harming me is the last mistake you'll ever make." As if summoned by my words, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in hellish red. But in that moment of total darkness, I heard them, footsteps, whispers, the sound of professionals moving with deadly purpose. "Surrender now," a voice called from outside, amplified and authoritative. "You have 1 minute to release the civilian and exit with your hands visible. Jinwoo." I recognized his voice despite the electronic distortion, felt tears of relief and pride blur my vision. He'd come for me exactly as I'd known he would. The men holding me were arguing frantically, weapons trained on doors and windows, their earlier confidence evaporating in the face of an enemy they couldn't see or quantify. These weren't street thugs or amateur criminals. They were facing the full resources of a family that had perfected urban warfare over decades. 30 seconds, Jinwoo's voice announced. "We have the girl," the leader shouted back. "Come any closer and she dies." The response was immediate and chilling. Jinwoo's laughter, cold and genuinely amused, echoing from speakers positioned around the building. "You have my woman," he corrected, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Which means you're already dead. The only question is whether you die with honor or as cowards." A new voice joined his, Helen, speaking in rapid Korean, her words carrying the authority of family matriarch and strategic genius. She was offering them one final chance to surrender, to leave the city and never return, to end this with their lives, if not their dignity, intact. The leader looked around at his remaining men, seeing the fear in their eyes, the growing realization that they'd walked into a trap far more sophisticated than anything they'd prepared for. 10 seconds, Jinwoo announced. I closed my eyes, thinking of everything that had brought me to this moment. A grandmother who'd taught me that understanding was the first step to connection. A job that had made me invisible until the right person finally saw me. A choice to speak up when cruelty masqueraded as power. "I love you," I whispered, knowing somehow that Jinwoo would hear me. 5 seconds. The leader made his choice, shoving his gun away and raising his hands. "We surrender! We surrender!" The silence that followed was profound, heavy with the weight of violence avoided, and wars that might finally end. Then the door opened, and Jinwoo stepped into the red-lit chaos, wearing tactical gear and an expression of controlled fury that made him look like an avenging angel. Our eyes met across the room, and his entire demeanor changed. The predator vanished, replaced by the man who'd made love to me with such tenderness, who'd trusted me with his secrets, who'd built his whole world around protecting the people he cared about. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the room to kneel beside my chair. "No," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline crash hitting my system. "But Jinwoo, they told me things. About their operation, their resources, their plans. Information you need." His hands were gentle as he cut the restraints binding me, but his eyes never left my face. "Later. Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you somewhere safe." "I am safe," I said firmly, standing on unsteady legs and allowing him to pull me into his arms. "I'm with you." Helen appeared in the doorway, surveying the scene with satisfaction. Behind her, I could see more figures, Jinwoo's people, professionals who'd executed a flawless operation without firing a single shot. "The others?" Jinwoo asked her. "Secured. All of them." Helen's smile was sharp with triumph. "Seoul will be receiving a very clear message about the consequences of targeting Park family interests. And David? Already released. Shaken but unharmed. She turned to me, her expression warming. You did well, dear. Very well indeed. I leaned into Jinwoo's strength, feeling the solid reality of his presence chase away the last echoes of fear. What happens now? Now, Jinwoo said, his arms tightening around me. We make sure this never happens again. No more threats, no more hiding, no more looking over our shoulders. The Castellanos? Helen laughed, the sound rich with amusement. Oh, they'll be receiving some very interesting intelligence about tonight's events. Nothing quite establishes credibility, like demonstrating how you handle direct attacks. As we walked out of the building together, I could see the scope of the operation Jinwoo had mounted to rescue me. Vehicles positioned at strategic points, personnel coordinating with professional precision, technology that turned the entire city block into a controlled environment. This was the world I'd chosen, the power I'd allied myself with, the family I'd been accepted into. Not just Jinwoo's love, but his strength, his resources, his absolute commitment to protecting what mattered most to him. No regrets? He asked as we reached his car, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear. I looked back at the building where I'd been held, thinking about the fear and the danger, and the moment when I'd chosen to trust in something larger than my own safety. Then I looked at the man beside me, at the life we could build together now that all the shadows had been cleared away. Only one, I said, rising on my toes to kiss him softly. That it took us so long to find each other. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Well then, we'll just have to make sure we don't waste any more time. As his driver pulled away from the scene, taking us toward a future that was finally, truly ours, I felt the last pieces of my old life fall away. The invisible waitress, the woman who chose safety over connection, the person who'd been afraid to be seen, she was gone. Replaced by someone who'd learned that the greatest risks often led to the greatest rewards. 3 months later, I stood in the garden of Helen's house, wearing a dress that had belonged to Jinwoo's mother, and a new necklace that caught the afternoon sunlight like captured fire. The small gathering of family and friends watched as Jinwoo took my hands in his voice steady and sure as he spoke the vows we'd written together. You taught me that understanding is the first step to love, he said, his dark eyes never leaving mine. And love is the first step to building something that can survive anything the world throws at it. You taught me that being seen is worth any risk, I replied, my voice carrying to every corner of the garden, and that some people are worth fighting for, no matter how dangerous the battle becomes. When he kissed me as his wife, sealing our promises with the witness of everyone who mattered most to us, I could taste our future on his lips. Challenging, passionate, dangerous, in all the best ways. The Korean Mafia boss, who nobody understood, had found someone who saw him completely. And the invisible waitress who'd spent years hiding from life had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is step boldly into the light, trusting that love will be there to catch you when you fall. Later, as we danced to music that blended Korean traditional melodies with French chanson, I thought about my grandmother's words about living between two worlds. I finally understood what she'd meant. It wasn't about being lost between cultures. It was about building bridges, about finding the connections that transcended language and background and fear. Jinwoo spun me in his arms, both of us laughing with pure joy, and I realized that this was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not safety, but the courage to face whatever came next together. The invisible waitress was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is allow yourself to be completely, utterly seen. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person doing the seeing will love everything they discover. Our war was over. Our life together was just beginning. And somewhere in the city, beyond Helen's garden walls, the Korean Mafia boss and his fearless wife were already becoming legend. A love story told in whispers and admiring glances, proof that understanding truly was the first step to everything that mattered. The end that was really a beginning, written in 2 languages and sealed with promises that would last a lifetime.